Hello, my name's Tom Cahill. It's the 7th of May 2014. This video is going to mix a few different things together, but when you listen to it, you'll see how they all link. They're all very much linked, and at the same time, even if you took the different things on their own and didn't link them together, you'd see how that each of the different subjects very adequately links the other few things together, and how it's very necessary to take them as they come. Right now, I'm going to start off with one particular example of this, and then I'll continue and I'll explain how it affects a more obvious contemporary example, which would fit very well with the British public, so they could understand it best. Right now, first thing I would like to say, right, there's quite a lot of people in America and Jamaica called Lincoln. Yeah, like they call it, lots of black people call their children Lincoln as their first name. Right now, President Lincoln is now, under the system which we have in place now, often gifted as being the person who got rid of the slave trade in America. Now, a little known fact, and you can't actually do a Google image search on this, is if you go into the Rothschild Bank of England, walk in the front door, take a immediate right and another right. I'm talking meters here. I'm talking like walk in the front door, walk 2 meters to your right, turn round, have a look, and you'll see a bust of President Lincoln. I don't actually think Lincoln ever got killed. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I know he's a very brilliant man, and he did lots of very good things, like I think President Jackson did. I think both of them were actually working for the wrong side. My actual view of Jackson was he killed the bank, didn't he? That's what he said when he died. But, and this is relevant, you say it's relevant. He's basically gifted with getting rid of one of the central banks in America, and Lincoln's very famous for like giving out the greenback. But the whole point of the greenback was America had lots of different banks in all the different states. Right now, all the different states are different countries, and they had a different constitution and a right to secede. Texas had 13 different states, all of which had a constitution and an agreement they could secede at any time. And by bringing in this greenback note, which had nothing to do with these sovereign nations, which were all the different states at the time, I don't know how many of them was, but there's quite a few of them, it was all made extremely confusing, right? Because it was effectively one place deciding the whole lot. So clearly that went completely against the whole concept of them being a United States. They were like a United State at that time, you see, so it actually brought them into one trading unit. Now, the whole point is, Lincoln, well, the other point is, right, so effectively they put them into one trading block that could then be manipulated. So the greenback, even though it wasn't an interest-bearing note, it was unifying the whole country, whereas they just wanted to be the United Trading States who would help to defend the borders and that kind of stuff. And also it lined them up very well for the war and stuff like that. It was very divisive. There's a lot more to it. President Lincoln was very clever. President Jackson, they're very clever people. I don't think they were good guys, neither of them. Lincoln, definitely not. I'd be very surprised if he ever got killed. It sounds like a load of bullshit. But anyway, the point is, the real Lincoln, his wife, was a major slave owner, and her family were a major slave owner. Several years before the war, maybe 5 or 6 years before the war, the combine harvester was invented. So it wasn't competitive to have slaves. This is the point, right? If you've got slaves, let's just not to offend anybody, but let's just say you've got a load of dogs or monkeys or horses around your house. There's nothing more annoying, especially if you consider yourself a respectable person, especially if you consider yourself a person who's a bit above the other people who immigrated into an area. What's the last thing you're going to want hanging around your house? The last thing you're going to want is scraggy, scruffy, dead dogs that are dying, got fleas on them, horses and that. You have to look after your livestock. So taking it in its very most primitive sense, let's just say you thought the Negroes, who you were like, you'd stolen away to use as kind of for your like industrial needs. You wouldn't want them rotting around your house, right? You wouldn't want it. It'd make you look bad. So if you're, especially kind of like the nouveau rich sort of aristocracy, the last thing you'd need is someone to come up to your house and like have some like person like wander out in front of them with some kind of disease and get run over and smashed by a carriage. It would completely it would completely ruin the mood. And if they're actually humans and they can spread nasty diseases to them, you've got to look after these people. This is the thing, right? You've got to remember, slavery had become totally uneconomical. It was not economical. Another thing to remember, the Civil War in America split the North and the South. It had nothing to do with slavery anyway. I can guarantee you it didn't, for a million reasons. The point is, lots of the states in the South had abolished slavery before the Civil War, but they still took the side of the South. It didn't have anything to do with slavery. Get your head round it. The South used slaves, said they could not be slaves if they fought in the army and got out the other end alive. And the North was impressing people as slaves to use them against the South. It had nothing to do with slavery. Abraham Lincoln's family was not doing well as a result of having owned all those slaves. They wanted to get rid of them, right? And in the South, they had no interest in them either. This was disastrous for these slaves because, of course, if you've been used as a slave for a long time, you haven't been independently thinking, you haven't been going out spending money and that. It's not good for you to immediately be just sent out into the open world, and lots of them died of starvation, had lots of horrible things happen to them. So, I'm not saying this, it had nothing to do with slaves. Slaves were a victim of that war. They were not a beneficiary of the war, and they were just victims. But the people who started the war and finished the war had no interest in them whatsoever, other than to, not have them have anything to do with it. That's the whole point of it. The point is, as I said, so lots of people call their kids Lincoln and stuff like that. Jamaicans and stuff do it because they think he freed the slaves. He didn't free the slaves. Most of them now know this, and they know what his history was. But the point is that whenever you look at the concept I want to talk about to you, which was word theft, right? Let's just take it to America, just so we understand that part, yeah? If you were in the South of America, south of the United States of America, right? And you were a very poor white person, as a lot of them obviously were. And you've got these big, massive white farm owners who own these great big farms, and they've got all these slaves going and doing all this cotton picking and all that stuff. You could imagine how that could be quite annoying, because you think, fucking hell, they're all getting well fed, blah, 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 they're doing really well, everything's going really well for them, blah, they're slaves, they can't do what they want, but they basically got nice houses, they get to get married, they get to have children, they get to go to church. Lots of them will have actually been doing better, because the whole point is, if the white farmer doesn't manage, the white sharecropper or whatever doesn't do as well as he wants to do, he's gonna be in a big mess, and his kid's gonna be a mess, might starve to death. There's no one who's going to go out and help them properly. Whereas if you had slaves in your estate and they were rotting to death and the children were hanging about all dead, half dead, you're going to go out and have to help them. It doesn't matter how evil you are. You're still going to think, these people are making my fucking property look a mess. I'm going to have to sort them out. Look, they live in their little house. It looks a mess. You're going to have to either put it in a nice secluded spot, far away, or you're going to have to make sure it looks okay. It's just the way it is. You're going to have to do all these things, right? And the problem is, so therefore, when anyone says that those poor white people are very uneducated, very poor, and in a very bad state themselves often, and also after the civil wars and all the oppression from the North, because Washington was dictating all the rules, even though they're meant to be United States and they're actually just basically one state, and they were depriving the South of various incomes, which is another very hard to get your head around, in 5 minutes topic, but they were putting various protectionist policies in on the sale of, the kind of agricultural products and promoting the northern industrial products. So this is an economic thing. it's very difficult for people to understand that these poor white people, the fact that they're saying, oh, they're niggers, right? Because nigger is for negro, which is like a Spanish word for black person, and they're near Mexico, and lots of them came from, there's a lot of interchange of expressions. The idea that just because they called the blacks who lived there niggers, making them racist, is actually very wrong. Now, I understand that lots of these people really had a real hatred of them, but I think a lot of that happened as soon as the slavery just ended, and then all of a sudden, everything switched around. There would have been a big transition. So I don't think all of these poor, extremely uneducated white people, who were basically in a very similar situation, if not at some stages worse situation than the blacks, were calling them niggers. I think it's very, very unreasonable for people to be saying, oh, well, they must be bad, it's the worst thing in the world, blah, blah, blah. Because at the end of the day, the word negre, right, is exactly what, if you go to Brazil now, if a black person is talking to you, they will point at themselves, say negre, right? So, very, very near to that place, they call themselves fucking niggers anyway. And they'll say, do you see what I'm trying to say? So, it's a ridiculous concept that's been made up. It does not define whether you're racist or not. Now, of course, due to the political situation and stuff in America over the years, it's become a situation where it's just politically inexpedient and it's impossible. You can never get away with calling someone a nigger. It's completely wrong. You possibly could say, look, there's a kind of like a culture of people just turning into niggers, just hanging about the place, being completely fucking wasters and all that stuff. But again, that has been forced on those people, and it has been forced on them by the increase in the amount of welfare that's been given out. So therefore, they've taken the men out of the families, and there's lots of fatherless children, and they've been deliberately targeting blacks to send them to prison. So basically, these people have turned back into an underclass again. Possibly, they're even in a worse state than they were under slavery. I actually think they possibly were. But the whole point is the actual perception of them is worse. And this is the horrible thing, because you can actually create a vermin underclass by spite if you're really evil. Like in South Africa, when Nelson Mandela took over, basically it was all these blacks running about the place. They had absolutely nothing to eat. They had nothing going for them. And they would have starved to death. So they were having to go around and kill white farmers and break into people's houses. They were like a vermin class. Lots of them were like that. And that's not their fault. But can you imagine if you knew that these blacks and they might come in your house and kill you and rape every woman in your house, and they might fucking murder you and steal all your stuff? Can you imagine what would happen? You would definitely get a gun. And if you've seen a whole mob of them running at you, what would you do to them? And if you're black, you do the same to them. So it's not a racist thing. It's just based on facts, and there's various causes behind these facts. But you've got to remember that despite the fact now, obviously, in America, you can't go around calling people niggers. The word is in use in Central America. It's the normal thing to call people, and they will call themselves it, because it's just a Spanish word for it. Now, that's an example of word theft, but that's a very convoluted one, because that's got a lot more history behind it. If you take the British example, right, in England, people often, I think in the old days, they used to call people niggers. They did used to call people niggers. They just referred to every black person as niggers. And they used to also refer to people as wogs, which was West Oriental Gentlemen. That's what that stands for. But West Oriental Gentlemen, I don't really know how far west from the Orient that had to be. But it was all about just the fact they weren't white. It wasn't an effort to be nasty to people, right? And the other thing is, what you remember is we had this big empire, and which we shouldn't have had, but we did have. And I hear the people in those empires weren't treated very well anyway by the people who used to treat the sorts, run them. But we went over there, we took over these places, and then all of a sudden, you've got these people coming across, and we had an influx of Pakistanis, all of whom were invited. They were invited. So they didn't just sort of escape and attack. They were invited here to do various jobs. And, they filled a vital gap in the economy. The point is, they weren't all Pakistanis. Some of them were Indians. But the thing is, Pakistani is 4 syllables, right? Is it reasonable for every time you ever speak about somebody to say a 4-syllable word? You've got whites, you've got blacks, you've got chinks, you've got goops, you've got 4 1-syllable words. You're not going to use all these words. Now, this is where it gets more complicated, right? If you've got people who are from a country where they're at war with the other country, yet it's all a continent, and the continent's called India, if you call them an Indian, often they'll go, I'm not an Indian, they'll give you all this shit about not being an Indian. And that would have been the same at the time, you know, because they're a different group. And if you get like a Pakistani and you call them an Indian, they won't be happy about it. So if you call them a Paki, they sort of know that just means like a brown person who's from around there. And it's obviously just an abbreviation, but I understand it's a specificised group of those people. Now, look at it one other way. Since then, several years later, the word Eskimo came into play. And this is where this whole thing becomes absolutely, completely ridiculous, and hopefully you can all see through it. Eskimo means somebody above a certain degree of latitude, right? And all of a sudden, people start saying, what, do you mean Inuit? Do you mean Inuit? Eskimo's racist! Eskimo is a technical definition of somebody who's above a certain degree's latitude, or at least that's what it means in England anyway, and the Western world. Inuit is like a little place somewhere in Canada where some of them come from. It's not all of Canada, it's just a little place. But people all of a sudden started saying Inuit, right? Now, they think that by saying Inuit, aren't I clever? The word has changed. Because when I was younger, some people said, oh no, you mustn't call blacks, blacks, or Negroes, Negroes. You mustn't call them Negroes, that's wrong. You've got to call them, I forget which order it went in. You've got to call them blacks. And also, you've got to call Indians blacks. And it's like, well, yeah, but they're not black. If I see an Indian running down the street, I see a black running down the street, and I see a Chinese person or someone who looks like someone like that running down the street, I want to just be able to say what I see running down the street. I can't tell the difference at the time between a Chinese and a Japanese and a Vietnamese. So you'd call them a chink, wouldn't you? Do you see what I mean? So you get these abbreviations because you don't really know what you're talking about. You're just giving it. It doesn't mean you're being evil and you're trying to discriminate at them. But this is where it gets very interesting, because the same people who push that agenda, they push this agenda about Inuit, and it's completely ridiculous because it's completely thrown the whole thing on its head. Because Inuit is just a little area. Now, a while ago, it's a good few years ago now, not that many years, but not a decade, but not much less than that. I was around Tom's house, and I said, who did those carvings? They said, oh. I said, are they Eskimo carvings? Because they were like people doing fishing. They look like Eskimos. Because technically speaking, this is the point. You can be a Norwegian an Eskimo, or a Swede, I think, technically an Eskimo, because you're in that latitude. And they said, oh, you're Inuit! And I said, hang on a minute, you political correctness Nazi. You're always going on about these types of things. You don't have a clue what you're talking about. And do you realise where do Inuits even come from? Because they actually come from a specific area. And they burst into tears and ran off and said that I was very bad and caused all sorts of trouble. The point is, obviously they knew I was right, because they just gone and sucked on the political correctness biscuit, and they didn't know what they were talking about. Because this is the thing, do you see the way it works? Now, if you get back to the fact that in certain places, right, this is where it gets more complicated, right? You've got different tribes. And, you know, if you go into the Middle East, like in Iraq, there's loads of different tribes. All those tribes are different. And those tribes don't really recognise racial land, geographical lands. They just live where they live. And they've always lived there, and that's where their tribe lives. And there might be sub-tribes within that tribe. They all live together. They all marry each other within these different tribes. These are big, massive tribes. Some of these tribes will be bigger than some countries in terms of the population. Really much bigger. The thing is, they're in a tribe. They don't recognise a national boundary. They just remember that that area is their area, the other area is the other person's area, and that's where they live. And this is the point. So there you've got a third layer, but it's not a third layer because they don't really recognise national boundaries. They just recognise tribal boundaries, and they're not really interested in anything else. So in one way, that layer actually supersedes all the other layers, because they just say, well, this is just like our family. It's our massive, great big family, but it's a very extended family. So for instance, you'll have Kurds in Kurdistan, and people are trying to now split Kurdistan off from Iraq. But the point is, why would you want to split Kurdistan off from Iraq? Because the point is, they should all be able to live in the same place. It's only when the whole thing's agitated up, like when Winston Churchill split Iraq off from other parts of the Middle East, and when they started saying that Kuwait wasn't Iraq when it has the exact same flag. I always thought the fact they had the exact same flag was very suspicious. But when the Americans, despite the fact Saddam Hussein worked for them, and he was a CIA agent, and he definitely was, they went to the Kurds and split them off, and he was saying, hang on a minute, what do you mean split off? And then they're doing under-the-ground drilling to undercut his oil price, and the Bush family's then oil price went up because of the problems in the Middle East, and it became economical to drill in all these uneconomical to drill areas in Texas that the Bush family owned. You start seeing where the disparity is. So you've got these Iraqis who live in, Kuwait, saying that they're different countries. They've got the same flag. What other country do you know that has the same flag? You see where the kind of problems start coming. And also, if you, for instance, got Kurdistan, they'd be then trapped between Turkey and Iraq, but they've always just lived in that area between them. It used to be the Ottoman Empire that took all over that area. It will completely confuse it. Now, if you look to another area, which would be, say, Pashtun, the tribe which is Pashtun, which is broken down into other tribes as well, that's based on the Afghan-Pakistan border, right? It's a great big massive area. It goes into both countries, right? So you've got Pashtuns who look like me, you've got Pashtuns who are whiter than me, and you've got Pashtuns who've got bluer eyes or greener eyes than I have, and you've got Pashtuns who are like quite brown. You've got ones that look like Pakistanis, you've got ones that look like Afghans. There's a very big mix of them. This is a huge area, right? But they're trying to say nationally, they've got to all be considered like in one country or the other. Now, then all of a sudden, if the Christians go on a fucking crusade and go and start murdering everybody over there, like which they did recently, they'll say, oh no, the Muslims aren't allowed to attack us this time because that will be considered like enemy combatants. But think of it another way. If you go and attack a Pashtun area, they're all Pashtuns. They've lived there for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. There's even subsets of them, very distinct subsets. They don't consider themselves Afghans or Pakistanis. They consider themselves the religious group that they are. Not religious group, sorry, the tribal group that they are. And they all have the same different customs and all that. But they're all Muslims, but the point is, they're different pre-Muslim beliefs, their ways of doing things in their different little tribes. In that one Pashtun massive tribe, or, like, set of tribes, it's a separate, they're basically a separate nation. Now, they don't want to be a separate nation, but the idea that if some of them go and help their friends in the other part of, they go across the border into Pakistan, or into Afghanistan, because they're getting attacked, they are basically a kind of floating nation, if you like. Do you see what I mean? And they've got sub-nations within them, and they're a very big population. I don't know what it is. But this is the point, that these people all around the world, so this very concept of splitting everything down into, you're allowed to attack somebody because they come from a country, but you're not allowed to attack them because they're a race, or you're not allowed to attack them because they're a tribe. And if you're in a certain tribe and you decide to go and help them, you're bad. This is all incredibly, to use a completely incorrect word, which should be the only politically incorrect word, is a very racist concept. That's why I think. I'd be interested to see what you think about it. I know quite a lot about this subject, and it extends far, far, far beyond this into areas that I don't really understand. But the point is, fundamentally, I know it's wrong, and I know that this is all about, obviously, completely bending the rules concept. It's completely about that. But on an everyday basis, for your average person, word theft is a massive, massive problem. If you see 5 people running across a field, one's white, one's very dark brown, ahead of everybody else. Yeah, one slightly skinnier, and he's sort of lagging behind, but you can see he can go on for ages. And you've got one who looks like an Arab, and you've got, you know, like if the one that looks like an Arab, once someone kill a Silpak for saying that Palestinians were Arabs. Well, they're not technically Arabs, and I know Iranians don't think they're Arabs. They say they're Aryans, don't they? I don't know. They look like Arabs to me. I don't know. I'm not judging. I'm just saying. I don't know. They've got brown skin. They're not Pakistanis, are they? Well, they're not. Do you see what I'm trying to say? What are you going to say? You've got a Pakistani. You've got a Southeast Asian, North Southeast Asian, Muslim, whatever. Are you going to spend the next month describing all these different people and what they might be when you don't even know what they are? Wouldn't it be just better if you could say, I see a Paki, I see a black man, there's a white one, there's a tall white one, he might be Scandinavian, there's a short one, he's a bit browner, might be Mediterranean. Wouldn't it just be better to be able to do that? It makes much more sense. It's not discriminating against anybody, it's just saying what you see. And people do say what they see. People are not clever enough to get all these peculiarities, all these differences. I know I certainly am not, and I don't think I ever will be able to pick it all up. It's just far too complicated, and for me to say I could do it with, very, very good accuracy, I'm just lying, and I don't think it's possible for anyone to learn it. Why can't people just get their heads around the fact, if you say, oh, he's a Chinky, and he turns out to be from Thailand or Vietnam, well, that's better than someone saying he's Chinese and finding out he's from Vietnam, because they look completely different when you know what they look like. But if you say he's a Chinky Chonker or whatever, then people think, well, he doesn't really know what it is. Or you say he's a Paki, and he's from somewhere around India, could be from Sri Lanka, could be a Sikh, they've got square jaws, often taller and bigger. Where's the problem? The problem is it's been manufactured to cause problems. That's the reason. There is nothing wrong with it. None of those words were ever meant to be offensive. None of the words I said are meant to be offensive. They never were. They were never invented for that reason. They were twisted to be that reason and to split everybody up and to get them arguing about absolutely nothing. That's the whole point. Anyway, I'd like to hear what you think. I know it's a controversial subject, but what I'm saying, every word of it, I completely stand by it. Every word of it's completely true. I totally believe in it, and I know a lot about this subject. I've come across it lots in the past, and I'd like to hear what your comments is. So I'm Tom Carhill. It's 7th of May 2014. Please comment. I'd like to hear what you want to say. Bye now.